That's a good start. Oof. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Commissioner Serafin, Minister Karbovnik, dear friends. Welcome to today's event. My name is Joanna Bekker. I'm the Deputy Managing Director of Polityka Insight, and it is my huge pleasure to be here with you today at our debate on bridging expectations, the EU's vision for 2025, and the role of the Polish presidency. I would like to start by thanking the co-organizers of today's event, the European Council on Foreign Relations, especially the Warsaw office, and Piotr Buras, but also the permanent representation of Poland to the EU and our partner, the European Climate Foundation. And of course, our distinguished speakers who accepted our invitation, and thank you for being with us today. Some believe that at the time when Poland takes over the presidency, that is in less than 30 days, and in less than 2 months Donald Trump will take office, that the EU and the world will be at a dangerous state, a state that we haven't seen since the Cold War. You may agree with it or not, but for sure, this is a pivotal moment for Europe. Foreign policy tests, geopolitical tests will come very fast. And at this moment of reckoning, the German and French alliance is at its weakest. And the far-right populist parties have gained strength at the European elections this year. The era of geopolitical outsourcing is over. Those are the words of Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. And yesterday in Warsaw, he said, let me quote, "Europe must fully awaken and prepare for fundamental changes and a correction of its policies, and that Poland is determined to ensure that in many matters, Europe starts thinking in Polish." What does that exactly mean? Today we start this conversation, and we will continue it at the Warsaw European Conversation on March 14th in Warsaw, an event that we have been co-organizing together with the ECFR for the last years, and I would like to invite you to come to Warsaw and join us there as well. And also on that note, I would like you to stay engaged and also join our weekly newsletter, the EU Presidential Weekly, that Polityka Insight is launching. It's launching it today. You can start registering immediately and find the link on our social media. But the first edition will come out on January 9th, and my last words will be thanking the partner of the newsletter, Orlen.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and also a very warm welcome from my side on behalf of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Commissioner, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Piotr Buras, and I'm Director of the Warsaw office of the ECFR, and it's a great pleasure to be partner of Polityka Insight in organizing this event, and also the Warsaw European Conversation, our flagship project in Warsaw. Hope many of you will attend it or follow online in March next year. And ECFR, as you know, is an independent pan-European think tank working on how to strengthen or working to strengthen the EU foreign policy and make it more coherent. And I think with several offices across Europe, we are and in Washington, we are quite well positioned to help build coalitions to achieve this goal. And I think this is today more relevant than probably any time in the past. And when I started my work in Warsaw a decade ago, the then Secretary of State for EU Affairs, Piotr Serafin, was the keynote speaker at the very first event I organized in Warsaw in my new capacity, and I'm very delighted and honored today to once again invite Piotr to deliver opening remarks. This time at his, I think, if I'm not mistaken, first public event in his new capacity as the Commissioner for Budget, Anti-Fraud and Public Administration, and as until very recently Polish permanent representative to Brussels. He's playing here on his home turf. After Piotr's opening remarks, we will continue already without him here on this stage with a panel on Poland's EU presidency and European challenges. But Piotr will be happy to answer 2-3 questions if the time allows. That's why I now thank you for your attention and invite Piotr to take the floor. Please.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Piotr, for inviting me to today's meeting. Well, indeed, this place was and remains close to my heart. Only 2 months ago, I would be still here, the host. 3 months ago, I was 100% concentrated on the preparations of the Polish presidency. However, life took a different turn, and today I'm in the European Commission. Maybe in 2038, when the next Polish presidency will take place, I will have more luck and work in the Polish team. Whether in the Commission or not, you can of course still count on me. I want to assure you that supporting the Polish presidency is one of the most important tasks for the Commission and for me personally. I would also like to take this opportunity to extend my warm regards to Ambassador Agnieszka Bartol, who is currently attending a COREPER meeting and still working on the program of the Polish presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, the first half of the next year will bring far more challenges than one could have expected just a few months ago. Today, many in Europe look to the future with concern. So you remember in 2009, Robert Kagan wrote an essay, The Return of History and the End of Dreams. Unfortunately, since then, history not only returned, but accelerated quite rapidly and shows no signs of slowing down. On the horizon, we see new disruptions and troubles. And you all know what I'm talking about. Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, concerns about the unity of the West, and the weakening position of the European economy in the global race. Actually, and I think it was already said by Joanna, it may be the most difficult 6 months in decades. You already know the outline of the European Commission's initiatives for the next 100 days. These include the Competitiveness Compact that is going to guide the work of this college throughout the whole mandate. This will be the Clean Industrial Deal, the AI Factories initiatives, and the White Paper on Defense, and many others. No doubt one of the key challenges will be to reconcile ambitions in the field of decarbonization with the goals of European economic competitiveness. We need industry on our continent. It was in Europe that the Industrial Revolution was born. It was a developed and innovative industry that has been the foundation of European economic prosperity over the past decades. It must remain so also in the decarbonized future. To achieve this, we need investment, the right regulatory environment, and lower energy prices. This is what the Clean Industrial Deal is going to be about. Europe must also be part of one of the great creators of artificial intelligence, Mustafa Suleyman, calls the coming wave, technologies that will change our world. It's not too late. We still have significant assets. However, we need to make up for lost time in the digital revolution, including in the field of AI. This is what the AI Factories initiative will be about. AI is not just a matter of competitiveness. For those who follow the course of the war in Ukraine, it's clear that new technologies, including AI, will also play a key role in the field of security. Security and Western unity are very much linked. We all know that a trade war between the United States and the European Union will not lead to anything good. It will not make us great again, neither America nor Europe. The only result will be a disruption of Western unity. Therefore, as Europeans, we should do everything we can to prevent a trade war. And this will be a joint task of the European Commission and the Polish presidency. We are also aware that today, without the support of the United States, Europe is still not able to guarantee its own security and peace. This should not be the case, but it is. And we see it painfully today in Ukraine. Therefore, we must invest more in our security, not because of President Trump, but because of Putin. And in this context, we will have the white paper on defense. The EU does not seek to compete with NATO, but the EU can assist EU member states in developing defense capabilities and defense resources. Of course, ultimately, it will be for the member states to decide whether such support is needed and welcome. But I think that the European Commission and the Polish presidency will work hand in hand on this matter. We know by now, not only listening to Prime Minister Tusk, that the main goal of the Polish presidency will be to strengthen security. Security in all its possible dimensions, from economic security to defense. I think that I'm honest that the European Union is lucky that at this critical moment in the war in Ukraine, at a time of potential tensions in transatlantic relations, during a geopolitically uncertain and simply dangerous moment, it is Poland that will be holding the presidency. Nobody expects that all European and global problems will be solved. But everyone, even here, knows that Poland understands the gravity of the situation the best, both in terms of security, the importance of Western unity, and economic competitiveness. Poland has a particular credibility when it comes to promoting a program of easing transatlantic tensions, and also to build support for such a program across the European Union. The fact that Poland is already taking responsibility for its security and spending 4.7% of GDP on defense is only one of the arguments on the table. Our common goal should be to deepen transatlantic cooperation, including in the field of security, and not a trade war. And I know that if this fails during the Polish presidency, it means that it simply was not possible. However, as an optimist by nature, I will say we'll find a common language with our partners across the Atlantic. We will rebuild these shaken transatlantic ties, just as the French rebuilt Notre Dame Cathedral. Thank you.
So we do have time for a few questions, if there are any. So if you could please raise your hand if you have a question, and there will be a microphone traveling around the room.
There are no questions. No?
No questions? And please introduce yourself and then a short question.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I simply wanted to ask what will be the practical possibilities of increasing Europe's cooperation, not only with the United States, but also with partners across the world and from the Far East, such as Japan and Korea. Because, as we all know today, if Russia, some people like to say that if Russia is a storm, China is the climate change.
Well, you are absolutely right that what really matters is the unity of the West. And the collective West covers also Far East, including South Korea and Japan. But I believe that the way in which we as Europeans, Japanese, Koreans, Australians, Canadians will interact with the new administration in Washington will be absolutely critical for the unity of the West. I believe that Europe, the EU, can play quite a constructive role. I remember the time when I used to work with, at that time, President of the European Council, Donald Tusk. And indeed, G7 meetings were primarily about finding a common denominator with all players of the West. And I think there is a space also for the EU to continue that this time round.
Please. Then we have one more question in the front.
Victor Woboda, Euro Prospects, student of University of Amsterdam. As a proud graduate of Third High School of Gdynia, which has been a birthplace of many Polish geniuses in programming and IT, of many of whom work at OpenAI as the chief scientist, for example. How do we, as Poland or as Europe, plan to keep our greatest youth at home and not, run to the United States? Thank you.
It's not an easy question. I think that I can leave that question, in particular with respect to Poland, to Paweł Karbownik. I follow his Instagram, and I saw that quite recently he was also involved into the opening of the supercomputer in Krakow, which, if I'm not mistaken, is also part of the AI Factories initiatives, but he might give you a bit more details when it comes to Poland. When it comes to Europe, at the European level, I think we should really look again into, what I have that feeling that what is missing a bit is, on the one hand, entrepreneurial spirit, on the other hand, access to the capital, and we talk here about the capital which is not risk averse. And thirdly, there is also the question of regulation. When it comes to the capital, another topic that Paweł Karbownik can develop, because it is in the remit of the finance ministry, this is the question of the capital market union. To what extent savings of Europeans serve the development of the European economy, to what extent they, as is the case quite often today, serve the economic development of other continents. This is one of the biggest challenges. The one I still remember from my previous job, the one that would need to be addressed also during the Polish presidency.
And the last question right here.
Hello, Commissioner Serafin. My name is Andrzej Lisiecki. I'm one of the veterans of the first Polish presidency, and I have seen many familiar faces, and I'm grateful for this event. I wanted to congratulate you on this huge portfolio. It's not an easy one. I have had a look at your mission letter, and it's even longer than that of the HRVP Callas, who already, people say it's an impossible job, but yours is even longer. So my question is this. There is a number of organizations organizations, associations in Brussels, such as Polish European Professionals Network, such as Network PL, such as Backup, the Brussels Women's Club, etc., etc. I was wondering if in your future work and how you accomplish the tasks in the mission letters, you would like to draw on the expertise, some ideas of these associations, institutions. Have you given it a little bit of thought? Is there someone in your cabinet who will be responsible for this, and how can we help, Commissioner? And good luck.
Thank you. I think I interacted with all of those organizations when I used to work here in the Perm Rep. As a commissioner, I think I would also need to diversify a bit channels of communications, including with the fonctionnaires, with the civil servants in the European Commission. So for sure, there will be a space in my heart also for the Polish networks. But my heart needs to be bigger, and I would also need to find some space for 26 other networks from 26 other member states. So that's what I can tell you very frankly at this point. Thank you.
Commissioner, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, give us please 2 minutes to rearrange the stage. And again, thank you for joining us today, and good luck.
Thank you, Anna.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again. There are some free seats here in the front row, so please, those who don't have seats and are standing on the back, you are very welcome to come to the front here and take your seats. Please do that. So, I would like to welcome you again to this panel, a very rich and diverse one, with 5 speakers, excellent guests, whom I would like to briefly introduce to you. We are very pleased to have Paweł Karbownik with us, who is Under Secretary of State in the Ministry of Finance in Poland. And Paweł is not new to Brussels, to say the least. He spent here many years, including his time in the cabinet of Donald Tusk when he was the president of the European Council. Paweł, we are very pleased to have you here. Sitting next to Paweł to the left, to Paweł's left, Heather Gravy, from senior fellow at Bruegel today, but with also a long career in Brussels, including her time in the cabinet of the EU Enlargement Commissioner Olli Rehn. Jana Kobzowa, to Paweł's right, my colleague from the ECFR, Senior Policy Fellow, and until quite recently, Foreign Policy Advisor to Slovakian President Zuzana Čaputová. And then on the farther left, Jan Lesser, Distinguished Fellow and Advisor to the President of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And last but not least, on the other side of the panel, Paweł Świeboda,
now visiting fellow at the European Policy Center here in Brussels, but also with a rich career, including many years in Brussels. Among others, Paweł was deputy head of the European Polityka Strategy Center in the Juncker's Commission. So much of introduction of our speakers. I would like to briefly refer to the words quoted by Joanna in her introductory remarks, the words of Donald Tusk, who indeed yesterday said during his meeting with the Secretary General of the Council of the EU that the Polish presidency of the European Union will not be a period of routine activities. He was pointing to the challenges facing the community as a whole. He said that it will be necessary to say loudly to Europe, it's time for a full awakening, time to reject all geopolitical ideological illusions. And he indeed, as Joanna quoted, said that we will be very determined in making Europe think about many things in Polish. And I think what comes out of these words is a sense of urgency in making the EU fit for purpose. It's a conviction that we have entered an era of unusual challenges, but it's also an ambition to provide leadership and make a strong imprint on the upcoming decisions and policies of the EU. And I think that here in Brussels, but also in many other EU capitals, there is a quite high expectation that Poland will not just be the country performing the role of the EU Council Presidency, which is quite a technical role, but that Poland will be actually an important driving force in the EU, promoting concrete initiatives and projects. And I think that provides a very good background for our conversation here in this panel, because we would like to discuss whether Poland can fill this leadership gap in the EU, which many believe is a major impediment on the bloc's capacity to act. We will like to discuss how could Warsaw bring forward the new agenda of the EU during its presidency. And last but not least, how after the US election could and should Poland shape the EU agenda in an increasingly post-Western world, which arguably requires a massive adaptation of the EU's tools and instruments. So I would like to start this conversation with Paweł Karbownik and ask him for some Kickoff's remarks, perhaps taking it from these words by Donald Tusk about Europe's need of full awakening and then political offensive. How will it be reflected in the Polish presidency's priorities and operations? Paweł, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Piotr, and thank you for this kind invite. I can confirm, last night I was traveling back from Warsaw with Therese Blanchard, who met the Prime Minister and the government, and she was well exhausted. So I can confirm that, we are fully on speed when it comes to the preparations, and indeed the times are challenging. So maybe I will focus on what is the sort of, key issues we are looking at this moment, because I think that Piotr mentioned everything, and I've worked with Piotr for so many years that I agree with him on everything, so it's difficult. I think, I don't need to add much. Obviously, the Prime Minister also said that we need to, Europeans need to wake up, and I think, it's not sort of an overstatement. Unfortunately, there are too many national discussions which are derived from reality. One such discussion is taking place currently in our Western neighbor, where the economic policy goes against all the economic policies in the world, where the dependence on China is hurting Europe. So I think, we have to have a serious discussion, and I also believe that our Western friends will converge, but for the moment they are still searching. So what we would be focusing on, I believe, is the major threats that Europe is facing. Obviously, competitiveness was mentioned, and probably coming from the finance ministry, I should start with that. We have the Draghi report, which has plenty of recommendations. And you know, when I came to Brussels for the first time 20 years ago, we had a Draghi report back then. It was called André Sapir report. It was made for the Commission President Romano Prodi. And the conclusion was exactly the same, right? You remember it very well. So basically they lost competitiveness vis-a-vis the US. China was not the big discussion yet, but you know, the problem was exactly the same, and the diagnosis was the same. We need more innovation, we need to revitalize European economy, and not much has happened since then. So my fear is that we may end up, you know, in a similar scenario, that we have Draghi, everybody is like, you know, excited about Draghi, but next year everybody will forget about Draghi. And this is our first priority. Nobody can forget about Draghi. We have to handle the structural problems that Europe is facing. The problem with Draghi is that, you know, he has too many recommendations. If we follow his recommendations, we will arrive nowhere. Which is why we have chose one priority, and this is energy. Why? Energy is the single most important factor when it comes to the European economy, which is dragging our industry, which is hurting our societies. The prices we pay for energy sources as citizens, as industry, are 3 to 5 times higher what the Chinese and the Americans are paying. So we may talk about innovation, we may talk about EMU, and we will talk about CMU, but unless we sort out the energy problem, we stand no chance of competing with anybody on this planet. So first and foremost, we have to sort out the energy problem. And I think we are quite credible on this front. My Prime Minister, with our small support with Piotr, launched the idea of the Energy Union 10 years ago. And all these recommendations are in the Draghi report 10 years later, which confirms what I said in the beginning. I mean, the diagnosis is there. It's been there for decades. The problem is that we do not have focus, nor political leadership to deliver what needs to be done. That's why we have chosen only one aspect, and this is the energy. And to be very precise, we have asked Alfred Kammer, who is the head of Europe at the IMF. He's a very good German, who will come to Brussels in January, and he will tell finance ministers how to fix the energy problem we are having. Because macroeconomically speaking, this is the biggest challenge. The second issue, obviously, Piotr also mentioned that, is defense, financing defense. I mean, if we see that we are incapable of defending ourselves, then it means that, you know, we have a serious problem, right? So the discussion about financing defense capabilities and building up preparedness of Europe to defend our citizens is a top priority, and it's not like a top priority among top priorities. It's the single most important aspect because it's about security of our citizens. And we've been working the whole year already as a government among finance ministers discussing this issue, and we have some concrete proposals that we are testing with a few capitals. But I'm sure that the financing for defense, proper financing for defense will happen. And I can tell you why. Because as the Commission estimated, we have 500 billion needs to basically prep up ourselves defense-wise in Europe. This was an estimate from before Trump, so now I think, you know, if you take into account the new geopolitical reality, if you add what needs to be added to reach the 2% of GDP, which is around 70 billion annually, if we talk about a fund that will run into 10 years, then we can fairly assume that we need around a trillion euro fund to purchase weapons, to build our industry, and to get ready for the worst case scenario. Obviously, if it doesn't happen, it's fantastic. But if it happens, then we have to be ready. I'm also mentioning it about this, and you may ask the question, so why finance ministers are talking about such an issue as defense financing? Because obviously, the Americans have been always making money on war. And massive investments in defense industry, it's dual use, it's innovation. Elon Musk also got his money from the government. So if we are talking about competitiveness, if we are talking about seriously, standing our economy on 2 feet, I think these are the issues. I'm not gonna, because you have to stop me, Piotr. I will stop here
stop you in a
because
second.
I think I can talk about CMU and other priorities, but I just wanted to mention these two because I think these are the most important, and these are the two aspects that we'll be handling as finance ministers in Warsaw during our informal ECOFIN in the capital. And I can say that Bruegel will also contribute to this discussion. Guntram is preparing a paper for us on defense, on the economics of defense. So it's in the making.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pavel. I will now turn to Jan Lesser because, as Piotr Serafin mentioned in his opening remarks, we are probably facing the most, or will be facing the most difficult half a year in European history for some time. It is kind of related, I think, to the outcome of the US election, I presume. So in your commentary, just after the US election results have become known, you were referring to Europe as being at the edge. And now we are 1 month later. The new U.S. administration is kind of shaping up. Perhaps we know a little bit more about what we could expect within the next 6 months. So my question is, what in this rather short time frame, how do you think the U.S. Or the transatlantic relations and the U.S. policy will impact the Polish EU presidency? And do you think Europe has kind of already prepared for that, or are we still far away from that?
Well, I think thank you very much, and it's great to be here. I think in answer to your question, has Europe prepared or are you far away? The answer is yes. I mean, it's both in a sense that, the outcome was not a surprise. This was heavily anticipated. It wasn't clear what was going to happen. What is a surprise is the sort of sweeping nature of it in the sense of, it's obviously the presidency, it's the House, it's the Senate, it's a balance in the Supreme Court, which we already had. So he's in an extraordinarily strong position. And, one of the questions that you have to ask is, to what extent is the 2016-2020 experience a guide to what we're going to see now, especially vis-a-vis Europe? And the short answer here is we don't really know, because Europe would like to have predictability from Washington historically for very understandable reasons. We're not in that kind of a world now. We're really very much off autopilot, if I can say, and I think that applies equally to trade and the defense field, and they interact. And so the piece that you're referring to, what I really meant was, the core of it is that there were this result in Washington underscores the importance of debates that were already well underway in Europe about economic competitiveness on the one hand and about defense investment, strategic autonomy, defense capability on the other. It simply gives history a shove, if I can say. And I think, what can you expect? Well, a couple of things. First of all, it's not about American isolationism. I don't think that's what you're going to see. There are some strains, and we'll have to see who gets through the appointment process, etc. I mean, it's very unclear because we bring thousands of people into the system. They have their policy views. We'll see. But it's not about isolationism, in my view. It's about more maybe unilateralism. And maybe Trump himself looking for a kind of lower maintenance foreign policy. I don't think this is not his thing. He does think a lot about economics. He thinks a lot about other kinds of issues, but not so much maybe about that. I think what I would be particularly concerned about, I would say two things from especially the perspective of your conversation here. One is that the Biden administration was very unusual in a number of respects, but It was very foreign policy oriented, but it was very EU oriented. Not that there weren't disagreements, there were obviously, but it took the EU seriously. It knew a lot about it. There was a close working relationship between key people, all of that, which wasn't necessarily true under Obama either, by the way. This will be a departure. I don't believe in the more extreme scenarios about NATO. The US isn't withdrawing from NATO and all the rest. We might make life very difficult, and that poses other challenges. But on the EU, it's like it could be very challenging. Because what if they just don't want to deal with Brussels? And they encourage this maybe a pre-existing tendency to bilateralize the relationship, even to focus on individual leaderships. That would be very, very challenging. The other thing, finally, I would mention is, and it really goes to remarks that the commissioner made at the outset, that one of the most corrosive things, it seems to me, would be growing economic nationalism on the one hand, protectionism and other aspects, and there's a need for closer alliance cohesion because there's a war in Europe on the other. These do not go together well. How do you come to your allies and ask them to be doing more with you on defense and security when you're engaged in a trade war? And by the way, this applies in Asia too. It just doesn't work well. And if you'll allow me just one perhaps final comment, there's a question about time here, time and timing. I mean, there's a very as an American sitting here, if you'll allow me to say, there's a very aspirational quality to a lot of the debate about, say, strategic autonomy or economic competitiveness. Maybe these things can be fixed. It's the work of many years to fix them, and a lot of investment, but not just investment, strategic culture, entrepreneurial culture, all sorts of things which aren't easily remedied. It would be nice to think you have decades to look at this, pivots to Asia and how you adjust to that and all the rest of it. What if something goes wrong in the South China Sea next week, and suddenly the United States is off to other priorities? That puts this in a very different frame, it seems to me.
Yes, I think this very short time frame in which we need to develop some ideas or policies. It's an extremely important point, and I think it brings me to Joanna and to Ukraine, because I think Ukraine has not been even mentioned, I think, in this conversation yet. But I dare to say that it might be the key challenge for not just Poland's EU presidency in the upcoming months, but for the EU as a whole, and for any EU leadership we can think of. And Jana Kopsova has just come back from Ukraine. She has followed the also European debate on how to support Ukraine. So my question to you is quite simple. Do you think that we have a plan how to deal with Ukraine in case the United States under Trump would become much less interested or not supportive of our goals? And if we do, shall we basically come up with this plan quite soon, or should we wait until Trump has revealed his plan for Ukraine?
Thank you for the easy questions and for the invitation. I think, look, the answer is, I'm not sure we have a plan. I think we have an ambition. We've had it very clear from the beginning. We support Ukraine for as long as it takes, as much as it takes, but nobody really understands what that means in practice. And I don't want to diminish that. Actually, over the past 2.5 years since the full-scale invasion started, we have surprised both the Ukrainians and ourselves in terms of what the EU has been able to do, both in terms of arms delivery, sanctions, and so on. Of course, that hasn't been enough to stop the war. But, if you look at the weapons provided, loans, grants, and granting Ukraine an accession perspective, launching the talks, the European Union has basically become a co-investor in Ukraine's future. We're not just neighbor, we have become a co-investor. And in a way, whatever happens in Ukraine is going to affect us, besides Ukrainians, of course, who are every day paying the highest price, the Europeans. It's not going to be the US that's going to be as affected as we are. Now, what that means in practice now is, it's one thing to have that aspiration, and of course, it remains the EU's key policy for Ukraine to stay sovereign, free within its internationally recognized borders. But we are also looking at a situation where we have passed the 1,000 days of the full-scale invasion. In 3 months, we will enter the 4th year of the war. And we have 2 big changes. One of them is the situation on the battlefield, which, mildly put it, is not currently in Ukraine's favor. Russia is gaining territory. Ukraine is losing territory at the moment. And you have the change of guards in the United States. And, it's not about doom and gloom, but I think we need to, when you ask about a plan, we need to be, we need to have a scenario and think about the possibility that in a few months, you might have a situation in Europe where on one hand you have aggressively advancing Russia, and on the other hand, aggressively withdrawing US. Not from NATO, I agree, but I think in terms of support, we don't know what President Trump's plan is, but he's made it very clear he doesn't want to pay more for a lot of the things that the US has been paying for. And in Ukraine, that's not just military aid, that's a lot of the financial assistance, support for energy, preparing the grid for the winter, and so on. So yes, we do need to have that conversation, not because of the changes in the US or what's happening in Ukraine, but because we will be affected ourselves. So in the absence of possibility of reaching that ideal scenario tomorrow, what is our best preferred scenario for now? And you're right that in one way, Ukraine has been mentioned, but a lot of what has been discussed, and I was actually surprised listening to Commissioner Serafin. It's not very often that you hear, and I'm sure you wouldn't hear it 5 years ago or 10 years ago, new commissioner on budget talking first about security situation, right? How do we increase defense spending? I mean, there is a real acknowledgement something has changed in Europe. How do we react? Now, if you're asking me what the plan is, I don't know, but I think part of that is going to be answering key questions we as Europeans need to start asking ourselves and then putting answers to the table. Because, one thing that you hear consistently from a number of Europeans is, whenever there is a negotiation, we want to be part of them, we want to be at the table. The question is, what are we bringing to the table? And it's a lot, right? I'm not saying it isn't, but we need to know. So the questions I would pose here as part of, forming that strategy, if not a plan for Ukraine, is a couple of them, right? Are we ready to accept that North Korea, Iran, or China are helping to shape an outcome of a war in Europe, right next door? Are we ready to step in more financially if the US Congress doesn't approve another package for Ukraine? Not just for next year, but maybe for the year after as well, where the resource is going to come from. If there is a ceasefire, are we ready to police it? Are we ready to enforce it? It's a big secret. Armistices are usually not held because of paper they're written on. They're held by troops, tanks, trenches. What is our contribution to those conversations? And we need to be asking and answering those questions to ourselves, because this is going to affect us as Europeans. And of course, part of the big conversation with our US allies and partners is going to be, what is going to be the burden sharing between the Europeans and the Americans on this and other issues. The trade war is one thing, the security is the other one. And I think, going to your point about what Poland can help bring to the table, I think the time for that conversation is now, and Poland is a credible partner to start that conversation and have that with other member states. Not just because you understand the nature of challenge, threat, and you have your own history that helps you understand what is at stake. You're also a credible partner, one of the few that, sorry, not one of the few, you're the one that's spending the most per capita on defense. We now have 23 out of 32 member states of NATO that are spending 2%. But you're a credible partner when it comes to taking your own security seriously. You're not expecting others to look after you. And that is a very important message to a US president who believes that others are always free riding on the US security umbrella. So I want to wish you good luck with leading that discussion. I think we should have had that discussion much earlier on. But it's important we start having it and start preparing for different scenarios.
Thank you, Joanna. And before I turn to Pavel and Heather, with whom I would like to discuss more the economic or trade issues,
One brief question to Ian Lesser, again on Ukraine, because Joanna outlined, the main components of a possible European plan how to support Ukraine in the upcoming months and long term. To what extent do you think such a European offer could impress Trump and have influence upon his plan how to go about the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, and here again, I think there is something inextricable here about the economic piece of this, which obviously is something he focuses on, and the strategic piece, which, on this continent is obviously at the forefront of everybody's minds. But if you look at some of the people that he is appointing or proposing to, he's nominated, some of them are quite hawkish on this, actually. Rubio, the national security advisor, the former general who will have the role of being the envoy for Ukraine. They're not soft on the issue. Now, can you convince Congress to go for successive new packages of assistance? Maybe, maybe not. I wouldn't dismiss the possibility, to be honest. I take him at his word that he will make an early effort to try to bring a ceasefire. Whether Russia, under current conditions, is about to engage in that in a serious way is an open question. And they may demand things that we're simply not going to, Ukraine, first of all, wouldn't accept, and we probably wouldn't accept. It's not just about, stopping on a line of contact. If that was all it was about, it probably wouldn't be so challenging. Not a settlement, but at least to stop the conflict. But there's going to be more at stake than that about Ukraine's future membership in NATO, EU, many other things, possibly even demilitarization and things like this. I don't know that the sort of the security establishment in a Trump administration would be any more willing than others to accept those things. I mean, the plan, by the way, as it's put, it's not really a plan, it's a mood, is really about, okay, we're going to put these parties together. If Ukraine doesn't want to talk, we'll cut off the aid. If Russia doesn't want to talk, we'll double the aid. This is a cartoon, obviously, but it may not be too far from his thinking, to be honest. But nonetheless, I think for Europe's own reasons, you would want to be prepared to do much more, at least for a period of time. And I think if Europe is willing to do that, I think a lot of more sensible heads in the new administration will be impressed by that.
Yeah, thank you. And now, Pavel, to come back to the issues which were raised by both Piotr Serafin in his speech and Ian Lesser, the question of competitiveness of the EU, and Pavel Karbovnik talked about as well. That seems to be the new, I don't want to call it buzzword, but it's clearly the strengthening competitiveness of the European economies will be clearly the main task or the main priority of the upcoming Commission. But at the same time, and the Draghi report is an important example of it. And Ursula von der Leyen announced that the first major initiative will be the competitiveness compass, the questions how to close the innovation gap between the US and China, how to develop a plan for decarbonization, and how to reduce the dependencies. So this is the proactive agenda of the EU. But at the same time, I think Piotr Serafin was very concerned about the possible trade war, and this is probably the key challenge, and the key concern in Europe. How to balance this protectionist and proactive measures in our, economic, industrial policy. Is it a trade-off between them? Can we do both at the same time? How do you see this the dilemma or the challenges that Europe will be facing? And perhaps if you could say a few words about what is at stake for Poland also in this game.
Yes, I'm afraid we have to assume that we'll be in a perfect storm. because President Trump, for all intents and purposes, will do what he said would do. So namely, he will introduce tariffs. He has this fixation about tariffs, which will not go away by January 17th. So tariffs will be up. Now, if the tariffs are up for European imports into the US, that's one thing, but then he is promising 60% tariffs on Chinese exports to the US. So what this means for Europe is that we will be squeezed from both sides. Namely, we'll be squeezed on the side of exports into the US, and this is not insignificant. Of course, the transatlantic economy remains the absolute central piece of the global economy. But then we'll be squeezed from the other side because of what is mildly called Chinese overcapacities. And I think that language will also have to change, because China, when faced with 60% tariffs, will need to find a market for its produce. And where is that market going to be? Well, the first attempt will be to sell it in Europe, of course. And we have to be ready for it. So China survived this first Trump presidency because the level of tariffs was much lower. So at 20% tariffs, they could devalue the renminbi and survive. Now, faced with 60% tariffs, it will be very much more difficult. And of course, China has tried, at least, I think they have tried to remodel their economy and focus more on domestic consumption, but this hasn't worked. Now, what's the guarantee that it's going to work this time around? I think rather low. So we should assume that there will be this pressure also coming from the other side very quickly. I don't think we should overreact, right? Because there's no interest on the part of Europe in a trade war, that's for sure. So we should not put any fuel into the fire, but of course there will be a reaction. And the Commission, from all we know, has the list ready. It was Harley-Davidson last time around. It will be something else this time around, but the list will be put out. We should not go too far in this exercise. Also because in the long term, I think we should safely assume that this approach will not deliver for President Trump what he thinks it will, right? It will most likely deliver higher inflation. It will most likely strengthen the dollar. So there will be those types of impacts which he will need to reckon with at some point. So I think playing for the middle to long term would make a lot of sense. Now, on the internal front, all I would say is that we need sort of an escape velocity on the competitiveness agenda, because I think a lot of actions are very worthwhile, and the AI factories that Commissioner mentioned belong firmly to that category. But it's a little bit of a sort of linear extension of what Europe has been doing so far. So AI factories are about throwing the supercompute capacity that the Commission has been building over the years at the economy, at startups in particular, and very good. I mean, that's helpful, but this will not be a game changer, right? So you have to do a lot more to achieve that effect. What Draghi mentions in his report are the AI verticals, namely combining AI with healthcare, with the clean industrial development, etc. I think this is potentially much more impactful. So I think in summary, and of course it's not an easy thing to do, we need to reach escape velocity, namely do all of the competitiveness related things at the same time at a scale which will make an impact.
Thank you, Paweł. Now to Heather. I think Poland is a country which stands among others for quite a realistic approach to the green industrialization and the green agenda of the European Union. Realistic, of course, it's probably not the best word I could use, but it's not. It's very often the Polish government, also Polish experts, point to the trade-offs between the accelerated decarbonization
and security. So basically, when Pavel says we need to do everything at the same time, and the Commission also claims that economic security, decarbonization, competitiveness, all these goals and aspects go hand in hand. It seems as if there were also some trade-offs, and we, for example, we want to have more economic security also when it comes to imports from China, but the question is how will it impact our decarbonization strategy? We want to have accelerated decarbonization, but we also want to have strong industry in the EU, as Piotr Serafin said in his opening speech. So my question is, what does it all mean for the Green Deal? And is this very ambitious plan at risk? Does it need adjustments? Does it require some reassessment? I think Pavel perhaps would agree that this is, at least when it comes to some elements, the Polish government would support such a view. How do you see that, and what do you think would be the implications for the green agenda in the EU?
Thank you very much, Piotr. So I think the key thing to remember is that in the public debate at the moment, we have some real trade-offs between the green agenda and other priorities, and we have some illusory trade-offs between the green agenda and other priorities. And I think Poland is really right at the center of that issue. So the real trade-offs are largely about short-term public spending to move things forward. So the short-term public spending, we've got too many priorities. We've got massive priority towards defense, as Pavel pointed out, where we need a lot of money quite quickly, preferably at EU level for joint procurement and getting the defense industry to do what it needs to do. I think we also, frankly, need a lot more spending on infrastructure protection, because sabotage is clearly the next phase of the conflict that Russia is having with the West. We've already seen that starting in the last weeks. I think it'll get much bigger during the next 6 months of the Polish presidency. So we've got lots of different priorities for public money. But if you think longer term, there is no trade-off, actually, between decarbonisation in particular and the green agenda more broadly and European competitiveness, because of the realities of the European continent, realities that we sometimes like to wish away. If only we were the Wild West and we had a Silicon Valley, we would have big tech companies. No, that's not really what the problem is. So I think the key thing to think about is, what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses? In Europe, we are a continent that has very little in the way of fossil fuels. So for us, the only way we can have energy security and bring down energy prices is to have massive rollout of renewables, because we are currently subsidizing the purchase of, for example, LNG. We have we're spending public money on fossil fuel subsidies. We can't keep that up. We can't afford to do that given the fiscal crunch that we're facing. So if we really want energy security and we want to bring down energy prices, renewables are the only way to go, because that's the only way we're going to be able to do that. But we have a rather skewed transition at the moment, where in Germany, for example, German householders are paying double the electricity price that German energy-intensive industries are paying because of the way the electricity market works. This is never going to bring public support for the renewables transition, because the public is not seeing a reduction in their bills. Now, I'm quite concerned that what we've done, the way we've managed the energy transition, we need to do it. We need to actually spend a lot more on it to make it happen faster, so that we can bring the benefits of lower energy prices for both industry and for households. But we need to sequence it a lot better. Now, the sequencing is about two things. One is about finding the money for the infrastructure to actually make the transition happen at scale by basically building out the grids and building the interconnectors, which would make European electricity markets much more efficient, which would allow us to move electricity around the whole system more efficiently. But it's also about decentralizing energy production, because the great thing about renewables is you don't need to produce it all from one big power plant and then send it across high voltage voltage lines to lots of households, you can have local electricity production, you can have nodal production, distributed energy systems, which are actually a lot more secure. And in particular, they're much more secure in the face of sabotage. Okay, so if we want energy security, we both need to have the kind of energy sources that we can afford in Europe, which is not going to be fossil fuels because we have to import all of that, but also an energy system that is resilient to risks of sabotage. So sure, we can, there are things we can do, like, for example, protecting offshore wind infrastructure and that kind of thing. But also, if we have decentralized electricity, then it's much harder for one bomb or one terrorist attack to knock out so much of the electricity system. I mean, Ukraine is having so many problems because they have the old Soviet highly centralized energy system, whereas a much more decentralized system would be much less vulnerable. So energy is about security, and it's also about our longer-term competitiveness. It's only renewables that will bring the kind of energy price reductions that will benefit our competitiveness, as Pavel was saying. But this has got to be done also in terms of sequencing in a way that citizens see the benefits and understand what is the deal part of the European Green Deal for them. And the problem is that the way that we're handling it, which is from a very supply side perspective, does not give them reassurances that prices will come down for them fast enough to make it worth making the investments at a household level that they need to make in heat pumps for the domestic heating, in an electric vehicle, in solar panels, and so on. And we see this in Poland, where there's been big uptake of solar panels, of individual people putting solar panels on their houses. And Poland is not the sunniest country in the European Union, but it's still worth it. But you have to make it worth it by giving them a deal. So you have to make sure that they get good feed-in tariffs. You have to make sure that they can have the kind of agile electricity supply that allows them to generate electricity and then to use it at the time when it's cheapest for the grid to supply it to them. Okay, so that means you need to have regulation in Poland which is not dominated by domestic incumbents, but is actually providing households with an incentive to move towards renewables, and most critically, providing them with help with the upfront costs. Now, the French government has done a very clever thing of providing credits, cheaper credits to households for buying electric vehicles and installing heat pumps and insulation. That's what the state needs to provide. That's the social deal part. And we need to do this at national level very quickly in the EU, because the emissions trading scheme is about to be extended to buildings and transport. Now, if you extend it, you're going to get the gilets jaunes all over again. If you extend it to buildings and transport before providing the benefits and the upfront capital cost help to households so that they can invest in the transition, so that they can get the benefits of the extension rather than just the costs. So we're kind of threatening households with sticks before providing them with carrots, before providing them with what they need to make this transition happen. So I'm really concerned about the deal part of the Green Deal being completely forgotten. We need that social deal at EU level, but then it will have to be delivered at national level, because that's where a lot of the capacity is, but also where the credits probably need to happen. But this is really important, and it's really vital for our long-term competitiveness, because in Europe we're not only very short on energy, on fossil fuel resources, we're short on all raw materials, all resources, okay? So because we started with, as the Commissioner said, we started the Industrial Revolution the first, right? 2 centuries ago, we started the Industrial Revolution in Europe. We've been going strong ever since. But that was based on coal. Coal doesn't work for us anymore for all kinds of reasons. But we are also extremely densely inhabited now. So it's very hard to do mining in Europe, for example. We don't produce much in the way of, we're very dependent on importing raw materials and intermediate goods. That's why our economy is so much more dependent on trade than the US is. You know, we have a 52% of our GDP is dependent on trade. In the US, it's only 27%. That's why they can actually afford tariffs that we impose. We can't afford a trade war. It's much harder for us. But that means that our strengths long-term for competitiveness in Europe are going to lie in resource-efficient solutions, resource-efficient technology. That's the kind of technological spillover that we can really benefit from by Europe producing the most durable, resource-efficient, circular technologies, products, and services in the world. We already have world-leading companies in this area, actually, including in Poland, by the way. I won't go into this further because I think I need to come to an end. But But this is really what we should be thinking about. We're not going to compete with China on low-cost manufacturing. We're not going to compete with the US on LNG-fueled industry. But what we can compete on is what we're good at, which is the circular economy, where we already have a good regulatory structure and we have a lot of world-leading companies, and where we play to our strengths, because in the next couple of decades, everybody will be short of resources. We are now, others will become much shorter of resources because of climate impacts. And so if we are ahead of the game and our companies are used to producing in a resource-efficient way, we can then tell the Americans when their LNG is not working for them so well and when climate impacts are affecting them, hey, we have some European solutions.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And I wanted to pick it up on we were talking about the short or this long-term interest in of Europe in developing competitiveness based on decarbonization, because I think there is a trade-off, or there is a tension between the short-term goals and the short-term challenges. And Pavel, I think you probably would like to come in on that, because I think with the ETS2, for example, this is one of the sticking points in this debate. Poland would like to postpone the implementation of this system. So perhaps you would like to comment on that, and perhaps on also other issues which were raised here in the discussion.
Thank you. So first, let me make two remarks, because it was mentioned several times that we'll be hit by a trade war. The macroeconomic analysis that has been done by the EU, maybe I shouldn't reveal too many details because I see some journalists in the room, indicates that the biggest cost of a trade war will be for the US. We can handle that. That's the first thing. It's very important to know that, we are not vulnerable. Obviously, as Pavel said, in this extreme scenario when the Chinese will be trying to flood our market, we have restrictive measures, trade restrictive measures that were there imposed during Tusk administration in the European Council. We are ready for that. We don't have to be afraid. That's the first point. Second point, Ukraine. We have secured financing for Ukraine up until the end of 2025. Obviously, there is a risk that Trump will pull out of this agreement, 50 billion USD. So now what we are doing, and this will be decided by the end of the year, we are trying to make sure that the next US administration either tells us now, or if we are unsure if they will pull out or not, we'll make provisions as the EU to ensure this 50 billion goes to Ukraine regardless of Trump. So we are safe here. Where we have vulnerability in terms of Ukraine is obviously the intelligence. So there is a discussion to be had with the US, but I agree that there are different views in the administration, and certainly we've been dealing with President Trump for quite a few years. When he arrived for the first time in Brussels, it was President Tusk who introduced him to Brussels. We've cooperated with him and with his team for several years in the G7, G20, so we know the guy. And the one thing we know, he doesn't look to be weak, so we have to remember that. But coming back to the Green Deal and what Heather mentioned, obviously I fully agree that we need to calibrate things better. And I don't know if you have noticed, Heather, that Piotr didn't say that the Green is good as it is. He said, and I've noticed these words carefully, he said, this is how the Green Deal will look like. It doesn't look like this because it's not good enough. We don't have proper calibration. There is no money. I mean, why do people rebel? In France, Gilets jaunes, in Poland, ETS2 is a killer. I mean, if we, people, there are already apps. People are already checking how much it will cost, how much Europe will cost them. So they put into the app, how many square meters is their flat, what is their car, and, the cost comes out. Sorry, this is not the Europe that we want to build. We are headed in the wrong direction. I will tell you more. 2 weeks ago, I was at the ECOFIN Council of Finance Ministers, and we were negotiating for many hours the next EU budget for 2025. What is the outcome of these negotiations? The practical outcome of these negotiations is such that the EU budget will shrink. So if you are reading Draghi, and if you are thinking that we want to add 5% of GDP on top of 1% of the budget, you couldn't be more wrong. The French, the Germans, the others, there was no discussion in the Bundestag, but we have an EU budget already decided to be shrinking in the next years because of the repayment of the RRF. So the RRF will eat our tiny 1% of a budget. The division of 50-50 between the national contributions and the EU budgets is such that probably the EU budget will shrink by around 15%. What it means in political terms? In political terms, it means if the EU budget, which is already small, and we know that we need 5% of GDP to invest and to be ready for the challenges we face, in political terms, it means that the European disintegration has started formally. So, obviously, what Heather was referring to, she's absolutely right. We can seize the market for green investments. We can make sure that our companies invest and also use this green business, because it's a global business. If we have a good industry in Europe, they can make money. Our companies can make money elsewhere, but they will never make money elsewhere because we don't have a single market. Because we have a divided market of 27 states, which brings me to my first point, that we will discuss energy market. Because if you want to seize these opportunities, we need to have the market. And for the moment, when I'm discussing with my Minister of Energy, with the Minister of State Assets, who has some influence on the utilities, and we are discussing the energy transition, we are discussing the Polish solution. When I'm talking to Alfred Kammer, I mentioned from the IMF, who will be preparing a report for us, he tells me he just came back from Berlin, and in Berlin they are also thinking about it, but they are thinking about the German solution. So everybody is thinking about their own thing. There is no single market. The IMF has calculated that. A recent study of the IMF shows that equivalence of if there were trade barriers, they calculated the trade barriers across the single market. So the cost of the trade barriers across the EU among states in services is 100%. 100% if there were 100% valid tariffs. So the equivalence of tariffs of 1% is what are the costs of the single market in services in Europe, which means there is no single market. The cost of the manufactured products, equivalence of tariffs across the EU is above 40%. So, I think we need a serious discussion, and this is why the Prime Minister was talking that we need to sober up, because the reality is such that, we are really going in the wrong direction, and the facts that I've presented, I think, are very clear. We need to have a serious boost in the integration. The last time we had a serious decision by the leaders, it was 20 years ago when there was an enlargement, and 30 years ago when the leaders decided to create the euro. Since then, nothing happened. We have war in Europe, we have Trump, we have climate crisis, and we cannot even deliver on the capital markets union, which nobody cares on the streets. Because the finance ministers, and I remember it very well when we sent it down to the finance ministers 10 years ago from the leaders level, the finance ministers couldn't find an agreement over 10 years, So I don't want to be too pessimistic, but the situation is as it is.
Paolo, thank you very much for this words. I think that's very interesting that you are pointing to this predicaments the EU is facing, and one issue which I wanted to, before I open the floor to the questions from the audience, I wanted to briefly ask Pavel and Heather perhaps to react on, and this is the question of money. Of course, we should have discussed it with Piotr Serafin perhaps, but we can do it without him as well. But because what Pavel, I mean, in the essence, I think what you are saying is that we need. You said. Which is quite a strong statement. We need to have a major step in the European integration, and I think this is it is related probably first and foremost to the money issue. So basically, because this is, I mean, of course, this is capital market union.
Money is the easiest part. You know, the defense.
But is it? Yeah. But is it? I mean, defense integration is also about money to a large extent.
Yeah, but the money. You know, we know how to raise money. I can tell you, it's we can fix it in 5 minutes. Really, I mean, the money is the easy part.
So I think I would ask you about that, how to raise money within 5 minutes. But I would like to. But I don't. But I still think that probably this is technically easy. But I don't see the consensus in Europe is shaping up around any viable solution. So just the question for Pavel and Heather, how do you see this money debate developing in the EU, and how to generate such large amounts of money we need for defense, for energy, for competitiveness. We need to have so many funds that it's difficult to count them.
Yeah, so before Pavel K. solves it for us, I think we could go back to the figure that Draghi quoted in his report, namely 800 billion euro that is needed for meeting all sorts of objectives, and that amount was derived from really summing up what is needed to meet all the targets that Europe has accepted politically. So that's the level. Then when he spoke, Mario Draghi at Bruegel in September, I felt he was pointing to something a little bit different, namely he was explaining that if all of the reforms that he postulates in his report work, and if the productivity levels are higher, then the amount needed will be lower. So that was the good news he was providing at the time. But it will be, of course, a significant amount, regardless of what the exact level will be. And needless to say, the governments will need to contribute. There will have to be more common borrowing as well. And then the missing bit is the private contribution. I think it was Letta who put the figure at 300 billion of European savings going to the US annually. So the question is how to keep that amount in Europe. Well, you cannot keep it through capital controls in a sane economic model. So you need to raise your level of attractiveness, and you need to make investment more attractive to private capital. And that's really the name of the exercise at the moment. How to ensure that private funders decide to opt for projects in Europe. Yes, there's a lot of leveraging that can be done by public funds de-risking investments, but it needs to be done really at a massive scale.
So I'm always struck when people talk about money by a comment I once heard from the owner of an ashram in India. And this was somebody who wasn't looking for a very large amount of money, but it was really very hard to get. But he was very calm and relaxed about it. And I asked, so where is the money going to come from for all these things you want to do? And he said, it's going to come from wherever it is now. So let's not forget, we're not living in a system which has an absolute shortage of money. It's about what we choose to spend it on. So just to give you an example of this, we spent in 2022 125 billion euros on subsidizing fossil fuels. Fossil fuels which are imported. So ultimately, that is money which is going, it was no longer going to Putin. It was going to Putin for a long time, but to lots of other autocrats. So there are things that we spend money on, public money, taxpayers' money, which could be spent on other things. So I think we need to think about rationalization of national public spending. You know, most European countries have about half of GDP is accounted for by the public sector. That is an enormous amount of money. But we need to think about the orientation of that money. Quite a lot of it goes on health and education. There's perhaps underspending, actually, on both of those items in quite a lot of countries. But there's a lot of spending which is never rationalized because it's very path-dependent, as economists call it. So I think that this question of what are we investing in for the future is absolutely fundamental. And we could redirect a lot of national spending. Now, the reason why we tend to obsess here in Brussels about the really tiny proportion of GDP that the EU budget accounts for, right? So I was talking about 50% is the average for national spending, as it were, in member states, and it's 1% at EU level. But we get obsessed with this 1% because that's the common money. You know, it's the money that you share with your friends when you're on holiday you worry about rather than what you paid for your flight and so on, right? But as Pavel said, there's going to be a big crunch about this because of the RRF, the repayments, but also because, and this is going to be a joyful experience for the dear new Polish commissioner, that he's going to have to put forward his budget proposal during the Polish presidency. I really don't envy him. I'm not sure how popular that's going to make him at home, but he's got 4 years to recover, fortunately. But it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy because the fights are really vicious about quite small, relatively small amounts of money. But the reason why the EU budget is so important is because it sets priorities, and because this pan-European spending can have an outside impact. It's meant to be catalytic. For example, R&D spending, for example, Horizon spending specifically on targeted research projects and so on, and for common infrastructure and common goods like, you know, electricity grids and interconnectors and so on. So we don't expect it to have a macroeconomic effect, but what it can do is to have a good debate which allows finance ministers to go back home and think about what is the national budget being spent on. And that's where I think that the Green Deal, for example, has to become a national deal. It can't just remain at EU level. Otherwise, everything that goes well with the Green Deal will be claimed by national governments as, look what we have brought you people. And everything that goes wrong with the Green Deal gets blamed on Brussels. So it's really vital for national governments to think about what is going to be the long-term competitiveness of our economy. Where does it really lie? Does it rely in, for example, fossil fuel subsidies?
Thank you, Heather. And now the time for Pavel to reveal how to raise a lot of money within 5 minutes. And then you can please prepare your questions and we will pick up.
So indeed, we have this conversation among finance ministers, which Pavel described on the private money, because obviously much of it must come from the private sector. I mean, we cannot do all as governments. And we had a discussion in July. I had an argument with the German finance minister, who is no longer a finance minister, because he told me that, you know, everything can be financed by private money. And as Pavel mentioned, the savings that are fleeing to the US account for around 300 billion euros. And as Draghi pointed out, we need 800. So even if we design the perfect capital markets union and all the 300 billion that are fleeing today to the US would stay in Europe, be invested in our Green Deal, we are still short of 500 billion. So what I told to Mr. Lindner was that as finance ministers, the first thing that we should have right are numbers. So we lack 500 billion for the investments that are there. And obviously there is a discussion which part needs to come from the governments, which part should come probably from some common pot, etc. But I can tell you one thing. Last week we had a meeting of deputy finance ministers here in Brussels, and the European Commission showed us the recent autumn forecast for the EU. And in these forecasts, one can spot a very interesting trend. And the trend is as follows. As the EU will have 3.1% of GDP deficit this year, and in 2027, if I'm not mistaken, the deficit will go down to 2.9%. What it means? It means that in times of war, in times of Trump, in times of climate crisis, we are tightening our fiscal policy. It's pure economic and political nonsense. We do not have a proper fiscal stance as the EU, because in this kind of crisis, governments always borrow a little bit to finance the needs that are here and now. This happened during the war. This happened during the 80s. Many people are talking about the miracle. Ronald Reagan, Milton Friedman. It was a liberal miracle. Look at the debt ratio. The debt in the US increased dramatically. So the whole, story about liberal Reagan revolution and the growth that followed in the 90s was also related to the fact that you need to borrow money to support the economy. So I think,
So where this money should come from?
From the budget.
I have another source.
But seriously, I mean, the suggestion is that the increase of the national contributions and bigger EU budget, or how would you like to generate this?
So as I said, if we handle 300 billion from private savings, we lack 500. Then there is discussion indeed if it should be the national budget, if we should increase the EU budget. But I don't want to get ahead of this discussion, because this is the discussion that we will have in the next months. But certainly this money needs to come from public funding. And as I said, I mean, there are governments who have major fiscal space, and we should use it.
Can I just quote two very brief things on this?
Please do, and I will, if you have questions, please. Okay, so, yeah.
So just to bear in mind, one thing is private investment. Companies invest if they have a very clear sense of where things are going. So if they have a clear sense of direction, right, this is going to be profitable in the future, this is not going to be profitable, they're going to invest. If they have regulatory uncertainty and uncertainty about, for example, are we moving away from fossil fuels or not, then they are not going to invest. So if we want the private sector investment, we actually have to set a much clearer course, and we really have to stick to that. And the other thing, just to mention on the fiscal space point that Pavel was just talking about, is there's a rather regressive tendency in the EU budget. Because of all the rebates and special deals and so on, the largest net contributors actually spend a smaller amount of their GDP into the EU budget than the others. So it's not, there are some animals that are more equal than others in this budget debate.
Thank you. We have there is a question, here's a question, and there was a...
Thank
so maybe
you.
we can collect them and then...
Dariusz Dybka, Business Science, Poland. A quick question to Paweł Świeboda on this one of the sectorial funds, so the EU Competitiveness Fund. Since it was mentioned, is it more the logic of Mr. Juncker Fund, which we already tested, or is it more RA or any other solution we might figure out? Thank you.
Thank you. And here in the first... Oh, there is.
Thanks, Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World. My question is, Poland hopes to play a bigger role in the region and in Europe, and historically it's been money, which was one of the main factors for countries to be leading. But now my question is it changing a little bit with Poland, especially with, like you said, Mr. Paweł, energy and security, with Poland also spending next year close to 4.7% of its GDP on defense. So can Poland take this bigger role by leading with defense, especially in the context of the ongoing war and energy security, looking at the nuclear power as well, compared, for example, with Germany now? We know it bet on the wrong horse with no LNG terminals, with Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and shutting off its nuclear reactors. So can Poland now lead not through being the richest country in Europe, but perhaps by spending more on defense and acting on energy security as well?
And there was yet another question there in the quarter.
My name is Anna Krzyżanowska. I work for the European Commission DG Research. Listening to you is very interesting because, in a way you're all right. You're pointing out to elements which are important. We do need more market, we do need more money, we do need more collective efforts in order to solve all these problems. So I'm not going to come back to that. But a person who's a brilliant person, one-liners, said once that Europe does not need Inflation Reduction Act, it needs Complexity Reduction Act. None of the things that you've mentioned is going to happen unless the companies, innovative companies, turn their innovations into products, services, and solutions. And that, from my conversation with the startup community and with small companies, is in Europe hell, right? That's how they refer to it. They said, you're generous, but you're impossible to work with. So to me, yes, we need a single market in energy, but most of all, we really need to find solutions, probably digital solutions, on one of the AI-supported solutions, in which no innovative idea is going to be sitting idle and thinking how to go through hours and hours of bureaucracy in order to move forward. So I would like to put that as a challenge to the Polish presidency in preparation for the next MFF.
Yeah, thank you very much. So maybe we could start with Paweł and the Competitiveness Fund.
Yes, so competitiveness fund, I mean, it's really a question for the commissioner, but I can give you my take on it, namely that I think where it would make a difference is as if it was about the aggregate picture, namely about following and supporting a product development throughout the life cycle. So from the very early stage in the lab on to really entering the market. And sometimes you can do that today with EU funds, even though there are important gaps, but you really have to shop around. So if the idea is to make this easier and simple, to get substantial funding throughout the life cycle, then I think it would make a difference. We can look at areas like batteries for EV vehicles today, where Europe is losing ground, and efforts to support the European producers such as Northvolt have not worked, partly because the amount of money perhaps has not been sufficient. It's also an example of corporate management difficulty, if not failure, in this very case. But there is no money for ramping up production, right? So there are gaps in the life cycle of a product at the moment. So if the Competitiveness Fund can improve on it, I think it will be very tangible in overcoming the planktonization. So you can really find money for everything in Europe, but you have to shop around. You spend a lot of time. There are a lot of complex rules that go with it. And on the money question, I think what this point really brings is that there's one point about volume, but another one about access and availability of funding. And that's where we should also learn from where China has gotten to at the moment. Namely, and it's not just about subsidies, which sort of draw our attention above everything else. It's also access to finance. So Chinese startups and scale-ups can find very easy financial solutions which are not available in Europe, or if they are available, they are much more difficult to pursue.
Paweł, you had a question about Poland's leadership role. Yeah.
So thank you for the question on complexity, because we didn't speak about it because we didn't come to this point yet. But obviously, this is the major discussion that we are having. We'll be meeting Commissioner Dombrovskis, who is European Elon Musk, in terms of reducing regulation on Monday, to discuss how to do it in a wise way. Because obviously, we cannot have silly sort of abrupt solutions. We need to seriously consider industry by industry what's the level of regulatory burden that industries are facing, including SMEs and innovative companies, and how to get rid of that. But we will never do that unless we have this breakthrough which I was mentioning, because the problem is that we are diversified. We have a market which is divided. So we have fantastic Polish companies who, instead of launching in Europe, they go to the US. because they don't care to deal with 27 regulatory frameworks, how to raise money in these or other markets. I just had a meeting before this panel with European industry, where I got fantastic example. There is like a company, I think in Belgium, which produces paint, and in order to export paint, they need to change the formula of the paint, the can of the paint, and the labeling of the paint. And we are talking about the single market. So basically, as I said, the single market we have now is a single market from 20 years ago. It doesn't exist in the 21st century. So we need to have our, serious reflection on what we are doing. And in terms of innovation and financing, obviously we are working on the ecosystem of financing innovation, because this is the major theme for us in Poland, certainly. After 30 years, we have to prop up innovation. So there are good solutions in France and elsewhere. But this is probably more to the local governments so far because of this fragmentation. And the point of the gentleman on the defense and energy, I think we are, as you said, we are leading by example. We are spending 4.7% of GDP, and if there is not enough European solidarity, we'll have to increase that in the following 2026 to 4.9% probably. Which brings me to the money question, because do you think it is easy for a government to spend 4.7% of GDP on defense? Do you think that we don't have social needs? Do you think that we don't have, higher education where we could put our money? Do you think that we don't have researchers who are earning, poor money and are struggling? Do you think that we don't have, hospitals which needs to be invested in? We do have that. But we have no other choice. So I think, that's why I'm saying that the money question has to be sorted out, because we have no other choice. The threat is real, and, even if there is a ceasefire, there will never be a ceasefire, because the ceasefire does not exist with Putin. So don't be fooled if there is a ceasefire. The ceasefire is when there is democracy in Russia. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pablo, and I'm grateful that you brought us back to this more external dimension of the challenges the EU and the Polish presidency will be facing next year, because we kind of, in the second part of our conversation, we focus very much on the internal economic and other issues of the EU, but I think the real challenge, or not the real, all challenges we have spoken about are real, but the most fundamental challenge, I think, is external, in fact. And that's why I would like to, in the last few minutes, I would like to bring Ian and Joanna back into the conversation and ask you basically two questions. For Joanna, we haven't talked about EU enlargement, which is probably not very surprising given the magnitude of other challenges we talked about. But still, I would like to ask you, what would you expect in this field under the Polish EU presidency? What should happen? How important it is for Ukraine? Is it anything which the Ukrainians really care about at this particular moment when the war is entering its very dangerous phase? And the question for Ian is, I know it's very difficult to guess, but I would be very interested in your take. Where do you see the transatlantic relationship by the end of the Polish EU presidency? So what, just imagine late June, beginning of July, where do you think we will be when it comes to the transatlantic relationship? So Joanna, maybe we'll start with you, and then with this more perspective question, we will end with Ian.
Right. I think maybe first a general comment on what was discussed. I mean, it's clear and Minister made it clear very well as well. We know what the solutions are. It's not like we don't know them. We've had them for 20 years and 30 years. It's how do we get there? And I think, the elephant in the room is the current political turmoil within the EU in key European countries. It's the instability. It's our own dysfunction. And we can talk about how amazing this EU method of endless discussions, agreeing on the lowest common denominator is, and that's great. That's partly how we work for such a long time. But These are very different times, and precisely because of the external threats, internal threats, and so on. So, yes, we can get the money. Can we get the decision on the money? That's, I think, the key thing, and especially when the timelines are so short, in terms of what's happening in different member states and when we need decisions on crucial things. Now, when I was talking about serious situation in Ukraine, it's not serious because Trump is coming to the White House. The situation in Ukraine is serious as a result of the decisions we have taken or didn't take a year ago or half a year ago, right? So it's about our ability not just to find solutions, but do it quickly. And that's where I think there is a huge question mark, especially now. And my concern is that, we can go on like this, but others read it as weakness. They sense it and they will use it, whether it's the US or other partners. And that's something we should avoid. Quick answer on enlargement. Yes, it's important, but the best way to foster enlargement at the moment is give more arms to Ukraine. That's the short-term priority for Polish presidency. Make sure that Ukraine remains a country that can dream of its European future, that can dream of a future where it's at peace, where it doesn't need to discuss the territorial compromises and how many more people and territory they will lose. And that is our priority as well, because, as I said, we have made that investment. We said Ukraine is going to be part of the EU. What kind of Ukraine enters the EU and when depends on how we're going to help them right now.
Thank you, Anna. And Ian, the last word goes to you.
Well, it's a bit of a Delphic kind of question. I think, look, if we put aside the wild cards, and we talked about some of them, things that could really go wrong in Asia, which would distract the United States very quickly, things like that. But if we assume that away for a moment, the Trump administration will have been the people would have been in place for only a couple of months at best, maybe. And some of them maybe still not confirmed if past practice is anything to go by. So you simply may not know. I come back to the sort of the question we were just discussing about Ukraine, because at the end of the day, part of this is about Ukraine for the United States, and perhaps Trump's preferences and things, this ego wrapped up in that and other things. But part of it is about Russia. And, frankly, at the end of the day, the central problem of deterrence and defense vis-a-vis Russia, I think, will remain. It will remain for the United States. It will remain for Europe, no matter what Trump or anyone else is able to do through diplomacy over the next months in terms of a ceasefire, for example. The central problem is going to remain. And I don't see the United States backing away from that, honestly. I really do not. Will there be more pressure for Europe to spend more and do more? No question. Will the tone of this be difficult? No question. One thing that we can certainly learn, just as a last comment, from the recent experiences is that it's very hard to escape from the personality of American presidents. Policies go this way, especially for Europe. People, including leaders, develop fixed ideas about American presidents. They do not go away. Bush never recovered, even in his second term, which was more congenial for Europe, perhaps, but he never recovered from that with Europe. Obama was loved from beginning to end, even though he didn't do half the things that Europe wanted him to do. Trump, we have an image of Trump. I'm sure he will do his best to fulfill it. And it will affect policies, it will affect the style of policy, which in the end does matter. But I think the central problems that we're discussing, which are very, very severe and challenging, I don't think are going to go away, and I don't think the United States can simply abdicate from those.
Thanks a lot. Pavel, you wanted two fingers?
Yes, one sentence, because I think Ian is right. Personalities don't change. But one thing we know, when Trump came for the first time to the G7, obviously he prattled about terrible environmental laws we have in the EU, because it made him angry, because he was trying to build a golf course in Scotland. So I think if we make the Green Deal right, maybe we'll have a chance.
On that optimistic note, I would like to thank our speakers very much for their contributions and for this very lively exchange. And we covered a lot of ground, but I think it reflected I think the magnitude of the challenges the Polish EU presidency will be facing next year. And probably there are many more which we haven't touched upon at all, but there will be other occasions, including the Warsaw European Conversation in Warsaw next year on the 14th of March. You are all very much invited to join and to follow online. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon, and thank you Polityka Insight for partnership, the permanent representation for hosting us here, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon and evening. Thank you very much.
I know it's very good. All right, we'll get something else.
You know how it is running here. You think they lose. You think they lose. No, it looks like, Poland